Good evening. Good evening, everyone. It is live. It is Angelo Robles, kind of coming out of a major and incredible US holiday known as the July 4th, or in this example, the July 4th weekend that sometimes stretches. That was actually a Friday, an extra day like today, but I'm feeling a little bit of the summer vibe. I've been working on a project for a couple of weeks, and I am ready to bring it. This will be a little different. It is a Southern story because it's really based or originated in Jekyll Island, which I have been to before in Georgia. So I have on my classic green seersucker. That's actually just coincidence, but it ironically fits into the story narrative. This will probably be one of the longer solo, and I did write this out. I want to keep it partially scripted to stay on track. It's a little technical in certain areas and partially from the heart. My mom back in the 80s used to say, grab a cup of Ovaltine, sit back and relax and enjoy. So, for those of you old enough to remember, back from the late 60s, 70s, and 80s, Ovaltine was quite the drink. Vitamin empowered, enriched in chocolate. And I don't know, maybe it did kind of with the hot milk kind of put me to sleep. So let's give it a try. I am going to call this the Jekyll Island creature is devouring family offices. So if you have a chance to grab that cup of Ovaltine and effectively without further fanfare, and I'll do a little bit of a wrap up in what's ahead in the coming week and a little bit of the summer after this. But again, I spent a lot of time on this over several weeks, kind of fleshing it out. And why don't we begin? So, the Federal Reserve disaster and why the Jekyll Island creature is devouring your family's fortune. This is going to be somewhat of a long form expose, really on central banking's war, in my opinion, against generational wealth. And this is really all thanks to the incredible book. It's like 600 pages. The Creature from Jekyll Island by G. Edward Griffin. So kudos to him. And an extra shout out, one of my relationships, although I've been interested in this topic for a long time, brought up to me that someone I do respect as a podcaster, way more popular than me, Tom Bilyeu, did a wonderful program that I did see. And Tom is very eloquent, so his is probably more polished. I do recommend that you listen to Tom Bilyeu's as well. So I'm going to start with a little bit of a prologue. The Creature Awakens, we're going to call it. More than 2/3, like 70%, of family offices highlighted a trade war as the biggest threat to achieving their true long-term financial objectives, or really even short-term over the next 12 months. That was followed by major geopolitical conflict, as some studies reverse that, by the way, and third was higher inflation. Yet they're missing what I consider to be the real enemy, the one that was birthed in secret over a century ago in, as I said earlier, in a remote Georgia island that I have been to, close to Sea Island, Georgia. So every carefully constructed legacy, I believe, really since then has been impacted by this. The Creature from Jekyll Island really wasn't just a book, it was kind of a prophecy. While family offices obsess over asset allocation and diversification strategies, the true destroyer of generational wealth operates, well, like many things do, in plain sight. The Federal Reserve System, the Fed. In 1910, a small group of individuals that made up kind of, I believe it was stated, over a quarter of the world's wealth, met and gathered on this small island off the coast of Brunswick in Georgia and agreed on the blueprint for what would become a couple of years later the Fed, the Federal Reserve. What they created, well, debatably, wasn't just a central bank. It was really kind of a wealth extraction machine. Why don't I begin with what I define as, or formally begin with Chapter 1, the Jekyll Island conspiracy and how the creature was born. So the meeting that to some degree enslaved much of America in the early 20th century was really, as I said, a clandestine meeting that took place on Jekyll Island, a small resort island, as many of us know it now, off the coast of Georgia. And it would change the financial landscape here in the US forever. And this applies to central banks broadly around the world. They're all bad. And they all basically are fiat money that is not backed by anything. So this applies to you international folk as well. This meeting, shrouded in secrecy and mystery, brought together literally some of the most powerful bankers, financial minds in the world. Senator Nelson Aldrich, J.P. Morgan, at least Rockefeller agents, as it's been described, and European banking dynasties. And no, they didn't gather to stabilize the economy. Wake up. Griffin, the author, argues that the unstated objective of the cartel on Jekyll Island was to use the government to transfer responsibility for losses from banks really to taxpayers. So the 7 deadly sins, as he describes, of the Federal Reserve, or again, G. Edward Griffith's masterpiece in The Creature from Jekyll Island, exposes 7 fundamental reasons why the Federal Reserve is not just ineffective, it's actively destructive. And we're going to get to points and things that family offices could do to help offset some of this destruction. Like I said, get that glass of Ovaltine, warm milk, maybe cookies. This will be a long one. So 1, systemic failure by design. It is incapable of accomplishing really its stated objectives. The Fed promises price stability, but has delivered what? 96% currency debasement since the year enacted with the Fed in 1913. It promises full employment, but creates really boom-bust cycles that effectively destroy millions of jobs. 2, the ultimate taxpayer, might be a strong word, but scam. We must not forget the phrase, the lender of last resort, means that money is created out of nothing, especially now or post 71 when Nixon took us off the gold standard. Money is created out of nothing, resulting truly in the confiscation of wealth through primarily inflation. Every bailout, every stimulus, every quantitative easing is wealth transfer from savers to debtors, from your family office to kind of the banking cartel. 3, the supreme system of usury. Griffith, the author, defines usury as the charging of interest on a loan, of fiat money. This distorts the true process of lending as it depends on the creation of debt and money from nothing. 4, the invisible tax through the creation of government debt and issuance of money from, again, nothing. The Fed debases the US dollar, creates inflation, exports inflation, because the US is how the world settles, or the dollar, and creates inflation in the economy. Not just here, as I said, really around the world. Inflation really isn't just rising prices, it's currency destruction hitting family office often hardest because they hold the financial assets, or a lot of them. 5, the war machine's fuel. It is the ability of governments to acquire money without direct taxation that makes modern warfare possible. And a central bank has become the preferred method for accomplishing that. Every conflict since 1913 that would soon lead us into World War I has been funded by the stealing of purchasing power from future generations. 6, economic destabilization engine. How about that? As long as people are given the power to tinker with a money supply, they will strive to circumvent the natural laws of supply and demand. The Fed doesn't prevent a crisis. It creates them through monetary manipulation. So 7, and I think an important one, the path to totalitarianism. The Federal Reserve plays an important role in the broader agenda, from my perspective, of what would loosely define as global socialism. I could say through the IMF, the World Bank development loans, and the growing footprint of the UN, there is a conscious long-term effort to move towards, well, like a world fiat currency. What I'll now go into is what I'll define, and again, keeping a little bit sequential with some of the book and my thoughts of chapter 2, the 2025 reality, kind of the creature's current rampage. Jerome Powell's impossible, I could use different words, but let's go with that. Impossible mission. At the March 2025 Federal Open Market Committee, the Federal Reserve, the Fed, kept interest rates steady at that point at 4.5. For, at that point, the second straight meeting. The Federal Reserve held interest rates during its May meeting and vowed to take a wait-and-see approach to future cuts. So, I don't know. Could I translate that as they kind of have no idea what they're doing? The Fed chairman, Jerome Powell, highlighted that the economy is progressing at a steady pace. Let's go with that, with solid labor market conditions. On the inflation front, Powell did acknowledge that while inflation remains elevated, it has moderated over the past year. So I would look at the Fed's 3 impossible kind of mandates. 1, price stability. Kind of, is that even possible with a fiat currency that's backed by nothing? 2, full employment, destroyed by their own boom and bust cycles. And 3, financial stability, undermined, I could say, by moral hazard and asset bubbles. Now, again, it all gets complicated. The tariff trap. President Trump's trade initiatives focused on higher tariffs raise questions about the potential for quote-unquote economic growth. Yes, the president has lobbied for the Fed, obviously, to cut rates with the goal of boosting economic growth. So Fed policymakers have obviously, for now, I think this could change very shortly, I've been reluctant to do so. The Fed is somewhat trapped between Trump's tariff-induced inflation, debatable, I'm going to throw that out there, and the need to maintain dollar credibility. It takes some time for tariffs to work their way through the chain of distribution to the end consumer, is what Fed Chair Jerome Powell followed the June meeting in terms of his commentary. We expect to see more impacts, which I guess is true, later this year. But let's translate the complexity of that. More inflation is kind of baked in, and they can't stop it. I guess, again, I say this on other topics. It's kind of no stopping this train. Now, I could get into the U.S. debt. I could get into the big, beautiful bill, adding another quote unquote, 6-7 trillion over the coming years. Again, we're backed by nothing. Oh, well, stable coins may be a bit of a savior since China and Japan won't be buying. So maybe the fiat, the bluff, the nonsense of it all could continue for a long time. But that's going to be a subject for a different time. Chapter 3, the family office apocalypse, how the creature devours generational wealth. So inflation is really a stealth attack. Family offices, yes, they pay close attention to inflation dynamics, or they should. Passing on their wealth to the next generation becomes harder when rising inflation threatens to erode the value of investments over time, aka purchasing power. CPI typically, in my opinion, gravely underestimates living expenses and prices of more luxury items. But again, we're kind of talking about the super rich here. The brutal truth, government inflation statistics are often effectively propaganda. CPI typically understates families' living expenses and prices of luxury items. Your family office is real for the underlying family. Often inflation rate could be 2 to 3x what the reported numbers are. It is somewhat dependent on the family and their purchases and expenditures. So the asset bubble dependency, cash rates exceeded inflation from 1980 to the great financial crisis. But real rates are now negative. The takeaway: investors have been beating inflation easily, well, as long as, at least in the stock market, they had money invested. The Fed has forced family offices into kind of a Faustian bargain. Hold cash and lose purchasing power badly, by the way, over time, or buy inflated assets and risk crashes. Holding cash will continue to come at a significant cost, as central banks will be slow to hike rates, and inflation government bonds such as TIPS carry, well, could be negative real yields, so will likely, from my perspective, underperform inflation. So this could go into what I would call a policy era cascade. Banking systems are largely insulated from inflation, but vulnerabilities at some banks can lead to trade-offs containing inflation and protecting financial stability. I know, live on this Monday night approaching 9 o'clock Eastern, this is really scintillating stuff. Keep on sipping the Ovaltine. 3% of banks in advanced economies and 6% in emerging economies are at least exposed to elevated interest rates, as Silicon Valley Bank at the onset of its failure. The Fed's next move will trigger either what? Runaway inflation if they cut rates, banking system collapse if they raise rates, stagflation if they do nothing. All paths lead to challenges, potentially, to family offices. Let's call the upcoming Chapter 4 the fiat currency death spiral. God, I put out such exciting stuff. And you thought everything I did was AI. The mathematics of monetary destruction. Fiat money isn't linked to physical reserves, such as a national stockpile of gold or silver, so it risks losing value due to inflation. It might even become worthless in the event of hyperinflation. We've seen that happen before. Hello, Argentina and others. Every fiat currency in history has ended the same way. Every fiat currency in history has ended the same way, a complete collapse. But now we have a new way. I mentioned stable coins or the facade to continue. I don't know, like maybe for decades. Eventually, this will come home to roost, probably sooner than that. The money will no longer hold value if people lose faith in a nation's currency, unlike a currency backed by gold. This type of currency has at least some level of intrinsic value because of the demand for gold and jewelry, electronics, and other goods. I mean, manufacturing, electronic devices, even computers and aerospace vehicles. So the dollar's terminal diagnosis. The US dollar is considered to be both fiat money and legal tender. The federal government stopped allowing citizens to exchange currency for governmental gold with the passage of the Emergency Banking Act of 1933. The gold standard backed US dollar, as I mentioned, until 1971, when then President Nixon severed the last link to gold. And since then, the dollar has kind of survived on one, military enforcement, somewhat of a petrodollar system, network effects, global reserve currency, lack of alternatives, really until now. Making a little adjustment to my sound. I don't know why that's beeping in the background. So all three advantages are eroding simultaneously. The coming monetary reset. The Project 2025 playbook offers policy prescriptions regarding the future of the Federal Reserve and monetary policy. At minimum, the authority of the Federal Reserve, I think, should be significantly reduced. At maximum, the Federal Reserve, some would argue, certainly Griffin and others, eliminated. Even conservative policy circles recognize the Fed's existential threat. Why don't we put it that way? The Project 25 monetary policy proposals include returning the US to the gold standard, at least commodity backed money, elimination of the Federal Reserve's dual mandate of maximum employment and price stability, replaced with a sole focus on, well, what? Price stability. I promise we're the it's approaching. Again, I spent a lot of time on this. I know it's of interest to probably like half of 1% of family offices. I apparently like to tackle things that only I have an interest in, but I know these are the things that family offices should be focused on. Chapter 5. And boy, that was an incredible book, but what a deep read. The gold standards renaissance. Now, is that the creature's kryptonite? Why gold terrifies central banks under the gold standard, there is really no government control of the quantity of money in the economy. While a system based on fiat money requires central bank intervention to regulate the monetary supply, the gold standard equals monetary discipline. God forbid we have that. And the end of wealth extraction. But do we really want monetary discipline? Apparently not. Americans don't have the discipline and don't want it. Oh, there's lots I could go into on that one, but this is long enough. A classical gold standard was used by the most advanced economies from the early, 1870s until the early 1930s and beyond for some like the US under this commodity money system. Each unit of currency, including the US, was backed by specific amounts of gold, preventing arbitrary money printing, which is going to be the lead cause. I'm not saying the only, but the lead of inflation and could lead to hyperinflation. When you're printing money from nothing, that's never ended well. So the empirical evidence, unlike fiat currency, gold, like I said, has intrinsic value. Historically keeps pace with inflation. An ounce of gold today holds the same purchasing power as it did decades ago, making it an attractive hedge against currency devaluation. So during crisis, the pattern is clear. Now, how about Bitcoin? Currency is leading the monetary system during its growth during COVID-19, the pandemic, followed by gold. However, US dollar mostly leads Bitcoin during a non-crisis period, while gold is found to lead the US dollar through the sample period in study. The family office gold imperative. Gold is a robust hedge against currency's depreciation. It exhibits substantial safe haven properties during turmoil periods. Through previous studies, gold has proven to be a good asset protection, effectively a hedge for most assets. Gold bullion provides economic freedom separate from government control. Unless, like 1933, they just have you turn that in for dollars. Who knows what that future might hold? When saving in cash, individuals are subject to decisions made by central banks and changes in monetary policy, including companies you often all invest in that effectively are US companies, all tied into the dollar. Gold as a tangible asset offers a level of security and independence. Okay, chapter 6, the family office. How about defed strategy? How about that? So what are some immediate actions that every family office could take? One, understand economic policy. Understand macroeconomics broadly, the banking system and how it works. Don't be ignorant to it. One, the gold foundation. What would be a proper allocation to real physical gold? How should it be stored? I've done programs on that before. Are we talking 5%, 10%, 20, 25%? It's going to be for you to decide, but form a thesis and make a decision from a level of intellect. Definitely diversified storage. I would say multiple jurisdictions and multiple forms. I'm really talking direct ownership here, not ETFs or certificates or proxies. The currency hedge matrix, it has empirical results. It suggests that gold is an effective and robust hedge against the depreciation value of currencies, period. Interested, including myself, in Swiss francs, which probably was the last quasi-gold-backed currency. Singapore dollars, very fiscal, disciplined fiscally. Maybe that's the way that I'd put it. And yes, Bitcoin, I could argue not your keys, not your Bitcoin, a subject for a different time. How about also a real asset foundation? A better approach is to construct a diversified portfolio that includes real assets, including things like, I know you already have equities. And again, I have a lot of money in the Max 7, broadly the triple Q. I agree. I hear you. I'm looking at long term, but of course to Bitcoin and gold, as I described. Real estate, which has not been my bailiwick, but depending on don't be over levered and you really know your geographic area. But how about productive farmland, energy infrastructure, commodity producers, and real estate? Again, I'd just be a little careful on debt. So, I mean, there might be a contrarian positioning. The findings indicate that an investor with momentum can consider investing even greater in Bitcoin and gold, while the contrarian investment strategy is more advisable for the fiat money market during what some would argue is a crisis period. So is there really what some would define as a 7-point defense protocol? 1, abandon fiat thinking. Stop measuring wealth in dollars. Start measuring wealth. Well, how about in ounces of gold or greater than that? Barrels of oil, acres of productive land, hours of skilled labor. 2, geographic diversification. The Fed's destruction will not be contained to America. Multiple jurisdictions with different monetary systems. And I think that is going to be essential. I gave some examples of varying currencies. I would look at, 3, maybe generational education. The most dangerous, obvious solution, that money management equals financial stewardship. Teach the next generation about monetary history, not really or only portfolio theory. Guys, I know I'm going long in this one, and a little bit of context. So no, the government's not going to be cutting me off. I don't got a lot of power left. This is a long one. So my son is traveling. He took the one charger I have for this computer, and I'm down to probably about 5% power. So if I get cut off, it's not Jerome Powell's not cutting off my link. At least I don't think. So political hedging, transforming to free banking would transfer control of monetary policy from the Fed, kind of to the president and Congress, which would oversee implementation of the system. Prepare for multiple monetary system scenarios. Well, that gets a little deeper. Liquidity paradox, maintain enough fiat currency for operation. Sure, you probably should have enough for 2 years worth. I mean, I probably have more than even 7 or 10%. So who am I to talk? But recognize it as it is, a depreciating liability, not really an asset. The network effect, build relationships with other families pursuing similar strategies. Monetary collapse requires, I think, kind of a community response. So there is a timing imperative. Higher interest rates have exposed vulnerabilities, definitely in some banks. We mentioned that earlier. And many more would be weakened by a prolonged period of tight monetary policy. So the window for defensive positioning, if that is your perspective, is somewhat closing. Okay, so if I had a chapter 7, maybe the coming monetary apocalypse. So everyone, a little bit of context. If you're still new to this, I'm Angelo Robles. I'm a principal and active allocator, been in the family office community for decades. Some consider a little bit the crazy and wild one. Hey, what could I say? I'm not afraid to talk about subjects others are afraid to cover. And I have a private community called SFO Continuity. That is my membership community for families that want my creative thinking and incredible peers and thought leadership. Go to angelorobles.com and learn more. So the Fed's terminal diagnosis: CAP finds that 2007 scale financial shock today will result in 8.7 million people losing their jobs by 2026. The employment would not recover to current levels till probably years later, like 2031. Additionally, a loss in real GDP capital over the next 5 years, close to per capita, probably close to 8,000. The next crisis won't be like 2008. The Fed has already used the ammunition. Interest rates near zero for over a decade. Balance sheet expanded by $7 trillion. Money supply increased by 40% in 2 years. The moral hazard has been institutionalized. So the four horsemen of monetary collapse: the inflation horsemen, the prices increased by probably about 0.5% seasonally adjusted basis in January of 2025 from the previous month. Official inflation still have that cold from last week. Understates reality at least by 50 to 100%. Real inflation is accelerating despite the Fed's propaganda. The debt horseman, government debt, is approaching 40 trillion, will surpass that. What's the mathematical possibility of repaying that except through currency destruction? Wake up. The banking systems are largely insulated from inflation, but vulnerabilities at some banks could lead to trade-offs from containing inflation and protecting financial stability. Regional banks they're sitting on hundreds of billions of dollars in unrealized losses. Now, maybe 4 could be a confidence horseman. The money will no longer hold value if people lose faith in a nation's currency. International dollar demand is already declining. The BRICS nations are creating, obviously, alternative payment systems. I mean, could I define as endgame scenarios? Scenario A, a controlled demolition, Fed pivots to explicit inflation targeted at 4 to 6%. Temporary capital controls implemented. Digital dollar rollout accelerated. Interesting one. Subject for a little different time. Physical cash eliminated. Family office impact, maybe 40 to 60% wealth destruction. So is there a scenario B? Well, as if that's a beauty. Hyperinflationary collapse. The Fed loses control of inflation expectations. I need to know where to get my tissue. Dollar is rejected internationally. Velocity of money accelerates exponentially, and government implements emergency measures. In that example, family office impact could be 80 to 95% wealth destruction. It's worse than my first one. In scenario C, deflationary, which AI can be. Interesting. Fed attempts to save the banking system. Asset prices collapse by, who knows, 50 to 70%. Unemployment exceeds 20%. That's going to be utter chaos, by the way. So social unrest, political chaos, family office impact in that beautiful scenario. 30 to 50% wealth destruction in nominal terms. Potential, like real wealth preservation. These are ugly scenarios. Maybe the timing is a little off. Maybe, I don't know, maybe this is decades down the road. But you have to think about this. You have to think for yourself. Stop being so trusting in the system. Are you really getting this from what? You trust the advisors at the bank, the economists they roll out, the people you hear in the government? Like, you got to do the research and think for yourself. How about the winning move is don't play their game? So in chapter 8, the Jekyll Island lesson, what the author Griffin got right: the Federal Reserve, aka the creature from Jekyll Island, emerges as a story of the human lust for control, consummated among the powerful elite that expresses itself in the impulse towards collectivism. The Federal Reserve isn't incompetent. It's working exactly as designed. Griffin's central thesis is that the Federal Reserve represents not an arm of the government charged with guiding and manipulating the nation's economy, although it certainly does manipulate, but rather a cabal, a cartel of bankers and politicians whose main concern is to further their economic interest. A politician's main job is to get elected. Number two, to get elected. Number three, to get elected. And then after they're elected, it's to work on re-election, and in the process, power, control, and make more money. Let's just be realistic. Cut through the nonsense. The Jekyll Island meeting wasn't about creating stability. It was about institutionalizing a wealth transfer. So this may be what I call the family office awakening. Family offices have been playing defense in a rigged game for like over a century. The diversified portfolio theory assumes functioning markets and stable currencies. What if the opposite of that is actually the truth? So the three pillars of the Jekyll Island defense: one, monetary sovereignty, one of my favorite words. Your family office must achieve independence as much as possible from the Federal Reserve System. That does mean some of the things that I mentioned, but physical precious metals, not paper claims. International diversification with multiple monetary systems, some that I mentioned in various currencies. Maybe I throw in the Norwegian krone to that as well. At least I do. Real asset foundation as independent of currency manipulation. Pillar two, education warfare. The book that he wrote is about the most blatant scam in history, and it's all here. It's the cause of wars, boom and bust cycles, definitely inflation. I could argue depression, and perhaps in certain instances, prosperity. Every family member must understand monetary history and the Fed's wealth extracting mechanism. No, I'm not being negative. I'm just opening up to a reality. Pillar three. Shockingly, my computer hasn't died. I must be down to like 2%. Network defense, individual family offices, well, they are vulnerable. They need coordinated resistance, being part of an intelligent network and a shared community of like-minded peers who are intelligent, who seek the truth, and who share and collaborate together. That's the heart of what my SFO continuity is. Put me aside. It's the incredible families, the relationships I built up over decades, and the incredible families globally that are a part of it. Understanding through shared strategies, alternative currencies, and mutual kind of almost support networks. That's what helps create internally in the family anti-fragility. Okay, we're just about there. The creature's final feast. Your worldview will definitively change. You'll never really trust a politician again or banker. After reading that book, the Federal Reserve has had over 110 years to perfect its wealth extraction system. It's done a hell of a job. Family offices have spent 110 years perfecting their victimization. The creature from Jekyll Island isn't just a historical curiosity. It's a present danger, actively devouring generational wealth through, again, systemic inflation, which is really the invisible tax of inefficiencies of governments, asset bubble creation and wealth destruction, currency debasement, which is the stealing of your purchasing power, moral hazard institutionalization, I'd probably call it. Is that almost privatizing gains and socializing losses, and boom bust cycle manipulation, transferring wealth. This is so obvious, everyone, from savers to debtors. The question every family office must answer: will you continue feeding the creature that was born on Jekyll Island, or will you starve it by removing, as much as you could, your family's wealth from its feeding system? And the creature's appetite is infinite. Your family's wealth, no matter how rich you are, is not. In a world where fiat currency is prone to inflation, saving in gold bullion offers a more stable and reliable option than keeping cash. The Jekyll Island meeting, beginning in 1910, created a monster that has devoured the wealth really, of nations. Your family office meeting of 2025 will determine whether you almost become its next meal, and the creature is always hungry. And yes, from my perspective, it is absolutely coming for your portfolio. It may just do it very, very slowly, like a frog boiling in water. You don't notice it until it's too late. Is the only question left, will you fight back or almost fund, even if it takes decades, your own destruction? So maybe as a final warning, the clock is ticking. Tighter monetary policy is, well, is it starting to work? The Fed's impossible juggling act is kind of nearing its end. Given the continued fragility of the financial system, the Project 2025 proposal on financial regulations are dangerous and kind of impossible to even justify. And every month you delay defensive action is another month that the creature, I could argue, feeds on your family's future. The wealthy families who understand the Jekyll Island's true purpose in 1913 protected themselves with gold. I mean, I could argue private businesses, foreign assets, alternative currencies, they were doing some of those things. The wealthy families who ignore Jekyll Island's lesson in 2025 will join the ranks, it just may take time, of history's monetary casualties. Honestly, the move is now yours. I did an okay, although a little bit long, summary of all this. You really have to read the book. And don't just assume, because G. Edward Griffin wrote it, that every word is perfect. Some of it could be fact in his interpretation of it, but the creature from Jekyll Island, and I do think that Tom Bilyeu, well-known entrepreneur and podcaster, did a great job and probably made it a hell of a lot more exciting than I did. I do see that this has sparked yeah, there's a fair amount of feedback. Gee, I didn't put you all to sleep. Maybe just some of you. Well, everyone, I'm concluding. Yes, I do have like an AI supercomputer, but I don't have my system that connects to the camera hooked up with that. So I'm going to have to get my charger back tomorrow. But woo, looks like I barely made it through this one. I had a wonderful July 4th weekend, barbecue after barbecue after barbecue. I had a lot of thought, fine-tuning what I did today, and I hope you enjoyed it. And really an incredibly active summer. So one, I hope you enjoyed this. Feel free to comment, to like, to disagree. Happy to listen to feedback. Maybe parts of it were a little over the top. Would I like to have went maybe a little bit more broadly into crypto, Bitcoin, even Ethereum and stable coins, other metals other than gold. And I didn't really talk about art, which is something that I've become more of a fan on for the super rich, and even gems. So again, this is imperfect. It was a 35, 40-minute. I mean, I could sometimes do 2 hours on things. Just give me that chance with AI. That's easy. So there are no easy solutions. You're going to have to think for yourself and make your own decisions. But as a family in a family office, these are things you have to think about. And even when I entered this community in the family office community and I go to programs now, I just find it so superficial. No one's pushing any boundaries. No one's taking kind of us towards the cliff and the edge. No one's forcing us to think. Everyone is vanilla. Everything's boring. Like, I just don't want to do that. If that means I have less members than I've had in the past when I built Family Office Association, because I was a nice guy that put on good quality but generic-y programs, well, like, I am not that anymore. I'm a principal. I have rising generation issues and challenges. I'm going through this AI revolution like no one else in the family office world. It is really, really an exciting time. So go to angelorobles.com and learn more about membership, which I call SFO continuity, and take a look. I updated a lot of my programs on my AI Family Office Masterclass, my consulting services. There's lots of things out there for principals, rising gen, family office executives, and those that service the community. And I am so busy this summer. Next week, I'm hosting a mainly social soiree at this incredible penthouse in Manhattan. I then have my AI Family Office Masterclass, August 11th and 12th in New York. I don't know why you're not signing up for that. That could change your life in 2 days. I'm going to have various breakfasts and lunches, meetings. I will be going in and around Opal, Newport. So some of you I may see up in Newport. Don't know if I'm going to want to wear the seersucker. Last year was so hot there. I may go a little bit more casual if you're okay with that. And I'm coming out of the summer into September with a major program in New York. You got to join. Go to angelorobles.com and be a part of what I'm building. Thank you all for tonight. I hope you enjoyed it. Look forward to the next time. I'll be traveling for about a day and a half, but back officially in my office saddle on Thursday, and looking forward to it. Got some ideas in my head that I may want to punch out. And next week, a return of probably the favorite macro thinker that I've ever had on over the years, David Hunter. So he's back for 2 hours. We're going to go hardcore, get into some arguments. I mean, come on, you know me. It's going to be a lot of fun. Looking forward to it. Have a good evening. Thank you.